Ngabuto Boaz Kumete, aka King Boaz, and you are watching Global Sakamuzi. These are African stories by Africans, and I am somewhere in
Mandenga Cultural Village.
Mandenga Cultural Village, Eswatini. I'm breathing royal oxygen. You guys are missing out. This is KRAYZIE historian, but I will allow him, like, you know, I roll with nothing but kings and queens, and today I came to the kingdom and everything is royalty, from chickens, cockroaches and cows, and everything is just nice things. So I will allow you, Your Majesty, to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Your Majesty. How's everyone doing? My name is KRAYZIE historian. I'm from the Kingdom of Eswatini. Thank you for joining us on Sakamuzi. I'm glad to be here as well, and I hope we have a great time.
Yeah. So what we're doing on Global Sakamuzi, we're allowing Africans to tell their own story. We have allowed the hunter to be the one who talks about what they did to the lion, but we're lions and we're back, we're telling our own stories. And today we're going to be touching quite a number of things with the KRAYZIE historians. And maybe for starters, maybe you can tell us, what is it that you do? What is it that people, when they are looking at you, should expect to hear and see from you?
Okay, as the name suggests, KRAYZIE historian, I am an enthusiast for the historical knowledge of the world, especially for Africa. So I identify as a Bantu historian, a Black historian, and that's what I essentially do for a living. I'm giving you this knowledge through social media.
I have done, like, I don't know how many interviews with different people, but mainly in the arts fraternity. These are Africans expressing themselves artistically. But on Global Sakamuzi, I have decided to say, let's look into Africa. Let's look into that which defines us, that which says who we are. Let's look at our identity. Let's look at our roots. So let's start off maybe looking at the Kingdom of Eswatini. Is the Kingdom of Eswatini one of the remaining monarchs, not only in the world, not only in Africa, sorry, but in the world? Yeah, I think it's one of the three monarchs that still exist. And you take pride in that. What is it that we lost as Africa in moving away from our monarchs to this current, I think I would say, Western systems, capitalism, democracy, and
For me, the biggest issue is the fact that what I love about the whole concept of Eswatini being a monarchy is it's a self-identified identity. The fact that it's an identity that we chose for ourselves, and essentially it's one way we live by. So when you look at democracy is essentially a Western concept, right? A concept that was brought upon us during the colonial times, right? So you have African countries now who find themselves still perpetuating and living through that system, whereas before that we had our own things, and that our own system, and our own system being the monarchy, right? So that's how you look at it now. In today's world, you have Eswatini, which is one of 3 African kingdoms, right? And it's actually the only absolute monarchy in Africa left. So essentially, to make people understand, an absolute monarchy is where the king or queen of the country has absolute power, has all the power, as opposed to the monarchy in Lesotho, which also ceremonial. Yeah, it's only a ceremonial figure with the kings that way.
Awesome. So let's look at democracy and the monarchy. What is the takeaway for people? What is it that people in the monarchy you think enjoy compared to people who are in a democracy?
The first thing is peace. I'm not even going to lie to you. It's one of the things that we were discussing as today, is that Swaziland is a very peaceful country. And the reason for that is because of the monarchy, right? There's so much that comes with democracy. Because democracy, the basic concept of it being that everyone has the right to be heard, and everyone has their voice, right? And the country is represented by all the people, essentially, right? So now what you actually also end up having there is, when everyone has the right to an opinion, everyone feels like they have the right to speak, right? So now in Swaziland, the major difference is we have the structure of knowing that, okay, at the top of everything is the king, right? And then in South Africa, you have which is the constitution, right? So the major difference between the two countries. Swaziland has its own constitution as well, by the way. We're a
Yeah.
constitutional monarchy as well as an absolute monarchy.
Yeah.
So for me, the reason I say there's a lot of peace in Swaziland is because politics are not a major game that's being played in the country. Unlike South Africa, where politics are one of the leading games being played, and that's what causes so much ruckus over time. So that's the difference that I feel like, the peacefulness.
Yes. All right. Does this have an effect on the distribution of wealth, on the distribution of resources that are within a country? Where, for example, in a democracy, you have capitalists, that is, a few people who are
Owning
powerful,
a lot of resources,
they will be owning more resources. Does this translate into a monarchy dividing and sharing what it has as a country?
See, the unfortunate thing is, like, Swaziland is also a capitalist economy, right? A capitalist country.
Yeah.
So the fact that we are a monarchy doesn't change the fact that capitalism still rules as well, right?
Alright.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Because now where you find yourself, you have a lot of the resources being owned by few people, which is what capitalism is all about.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing here in Swaziland. The only difference is we know that the person with the most resources is the king, right? So that when we know that the person with the most resources in the country is the king, and then in South Africa, the people with the most resources are the ones who are also the capitalists in that country as well. So the fact that Swaziland is a capitalist country as well means we're also face the same challenges as any other country when it comes to capitalism.
All right. Yeah. Now we've been discussing off camera some stuff a bit on education. Maybe what I would like to know is, what do you think is wrong with the education that you are exposed to? If there's anything that you could change, if there's anything that you could benefit from the things that probably we used to do, which now we've turned probably into tourist amusement.
Yeah.
What would be your opinion on that?
For me, when it comes to the education system, I feel like the unfortunate thing is there's a large amount of the time we're being fed information that's a distraction from the things that we should be learning about in its totality, right? I'll use, for example, history, right? There's no reason for African students to be studying European and Asian history in such an extent that we don't even study our own, right?
Yeah.
Our own history and information like that, right? That's the first fumble that you can essentially see, right?
Yeah.
And also when it comes to the ways of living, right? In terms of the mindsets that we've all been, our education system is so fixated on the Western identity of living that the African one is being neglected, and the sad part is it's our own reality that we are neglecting at this point, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, because since we had Mandinga Cultural Village, right, we got to see how the setup was back then in terms of how polygamy, how a polygamous family would have their compound and everything like that.
Yeah.
So, with Westernization, polygamy is not something that's essentially a part of Westernization. So now you get to look at the difference between Swaziland trying to still maintain its cultural rules and practices, whereas and fighting against a Western identity. And so that's for me is the big problem when it comes to our education system, focusing on the West so much that we neglect our own perspective.
All right. Maybe if you can give me 3 things that you think every child should learn by the time they finish primary school.
Reading and writing, right? That for me, that's the key thing, because when you can read and write, you can learn anything. You can learn almost anything. So that's number one. Also, mathematics, right? Understanding numbers as a concept is understanding another language, right? Because that's the language of life. Maths is all around us, right? So we have to learn maths as well. But then, for me, I think in the African context, one thing that we should be learning about. Okay, I wanted to say we should be taught money better, right? Because the way money has become such a focal point in our everyday lives now is that everyone needs to understand it and learn how to get it, earn it, and manipulate it, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I think for African students. That and when it comes to that, okay, so that was three. I just want to add the fourth one, right?
Yeah.
The fourth one is an African way of life. That's what should also be taught to all kids, in the sense of, okay, you understand now, you can read and write, you can do mathematics, you understand money, but now what is your purpose in life, right? In terms of what type of life do you want to have, what type of people do you want to live with, what type of society do you want to be a part of.
Now, coming back to the cultural aspect of Eswatini, I think walking around the streets of Swaziland, everyone is putting on traditional earrings.
Yes.
What we will call traditional earrings, because we have taken them away from being something that people wears normally. We now call them traditional earrings, or is it
yes.
that they're wearing, or anything that identifies that this someone is from Eswatini by just walking through, which is something that is rare. We see that maybe with our creatives in other countries and whatnot. So is there anything that Swaziland is doing differently when you are growing up, for you to be so much in touch with the things that define you, these elements that say you are Swati?
Swaziland practices its culture a lot, a lot. The fact that we have national cultural events that promote the culture in that aspect. So the major ones that I can talk about is the Umhlanga Reed dance.
Right.
The Umhlanga Reed dance is where you have the maidens of the Swatini going to get the reed from, so they march all the way, get the reed, and come back and build huts for the Queen Mother and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
So those cultural practices are the ones that create that identity of Swatiness to be ingrained in all of us. So you have the cultural reed dance, you have the Ingwala ceremony, which is essentially our Christmas as a country, because we celebrate it during that Christmas time, all the way up to January, right?
Yeah.
So even there, you find a lot of the country being a very cultural one in those regards, right?
Yeah.
We have a lot of our cultural practices that we still maintain, and that's when it also comes to the dress code. Just like how I'm dressed right now. I don't know if you can see this. Even I am in my African clothing.
Yeah.
This is the way it is in this country. It's not rare to find people dressed up in cultural clothing. Yeah.
All right. Now let's go to the reed dance. I know I promised a few friends of mine that I'll come with them to the reed dance, but we haven't been able to do that. So I want to know the significance. What is the significance of this ceremony? What is the significance of these maidens going to get the reed and coming back with it? What's behind it? What is it that we can learn, or what is it that is being portrayed in this dance? Okay,
so firstly, the reed dance is mostly about the maidens themselves, right? The women get to celebrate the purity of being virgins, or not having children yet, right? Because that's essentially that was one of the main requirements when you'd want to go to the reed dance as a maiden, is that you'd have to be a virgin. But now they've limited it to you not just having children, right? So that's the first aspect of it, is women celebrating their womanhood and their purity, right? And then you also have, since it's celebrated around the springtime, it's also a way to celebrate the coming of the spring, right? Yeah. So that's why you have the virgins celebrating spring. It's all spiritual like that, right? Yeah. So you have them going to get the reed, and they bring it back, and then they build the Queen Mother's huts and everything like that. So that's the reed dance is essentially, that's what I can tell about.
All right. Yeah. Now you put women, which is a touchy subject these days, when on different aspects, depending on how you look at it. So, what is the importance of a woman in the Swati culture? Going through the tour, we understood that they were the ones that stayed close to the gate because they won't be killed. So, why would an evil person not kill a woman? And even the society accepted, and this was also practiced, that if you put girls like close to the gate, even if someone comes in to rob or to do evil, they will not touch. They will not touch women. And what is their role today? How significant is a woman in the present Swaziland?
Okay, so the big difference that you can get.
Eswatini, sorry, not Swaziland.
Eswatini, yes. the big difference that you can get from how women are viewed in today's world and culturally back then is that they were held at a very high regard back then. As you were saying that, as we were finding out during our tour, is that even women during that time were not killed or assaulted, especially even if it was a raid or anything like that. It was the protection of women at all costs, right? And that's, for me, my understanding is because our ancestors knew the importance of women, for them being the life bringers and homemakers of this world. It's just, that's the major importance of women. So you get to a point where even in today's world, where all of that now, because of the way the West has decided to define how we live our lives, you have patriarchy being the big problem. So that's the difference. That's the difference between back then and now, is that patriarchy wasn't a thing back then.
Okay, all right. Maybe if you can expand, because I think probably you're the 11th or 12th person to talk about this on patriarchy being a colonial idea.
Yes, concept.
Matriarchy being something that made Africa to be strong.
Yes.
Back then. So maybe if you can elaborate on the advantages of having a matriarchy instead of even equality. Let's not even talk about equality, because we can never come to a place where we are equal like that.
Okay, so for me, the way I look at it is that the important factor here is control, right? Who is in control of what, and what are these people doing in it? So the reason women were given so much power back then is because they were in control of a lot of things, right? So for example, when it comes to farming back then, farming used to be largely done by the females, whereas the males would take care of the livestock, right, in terms of heading the cattle and the goats and everything like that. But the women would be the ones in charge of the farms, collecting grain and feeding everyone. So that amount of control, keep in mind that food back then was not just a concept of eating, but it was economic power as well. Because back then trade was a very common thing, where you trade through possession. So the whole concept of a barter trade, right? So if you are the one in control of most of the food, you are the one with the power. That's why women had the power back then, because they were in control of so much, right? So and that's why they say most African countries were matriarchal, right? It's because women were given that power, had that power for themselves and everything like that. So they would be in control of a lot of things when it came to the households.
Let's move on to what you stand for as a creator, as a content creator, as a speaker, as an influencer. Why did you choose to stand up for the Bantu consciousness, for the Bantu history, trying to correct African history, where you think this is not us writing this is some other source, and they have their own goal at the end of the day? Why was this your path?
For me, it's all about searching for the truth, Like, for me, beyond everything, the one thing that I want to know about myself is the truth, right? The truth about who we are as Black people, who we are as Africans, who I am as an individual, as an African, as a Swati. All these things, all these identities all these identities, I want to live my truth within them, right? So that's why, for me, I've dedicated my life to learning about African history as much as possible, learning about the way things were back then before the Western world came and changed everything for us, right? And this is the way that I would like to inform myself and my future going forward, knowing that I'm living my authentic African self. That's the big identity for me.
All right, let's talk about spirituality, which is another, I think, touchy subject for many people. People believe what they believe, and people will die for believing in a man, for that they believe is anointed, called, or whatever. People will die for their way of life, whether be it African or something that they brought from somewhere. What's your interpretation of spirituality, and where do you think Africans should look at on the spiritual aspect of life? What is it that we should be pursuing and going towards?
For me, you were right when you said that spirituality is a touchy concept, right? Because at the end of it all, when it comes to our beliefs, no one knows the final answer. No one knows the truth about, is Christianity correct? Is Islam correct? Is African spirituality and all the different forms of it, are they also correct about what the truth is? And the truth is, no one knows the final answer, right? All we have is the belief, right? It's the beliefs that we choose to have. So I'm not going to be the type of person to say, you know what, I believe people should not be Christian or should be African spiritualists and consider themselves that into this is the right way to live life or everything like that. No, I strongly believe each and every individual has to search for their own truth, right? When it comes to spirituality, when it comes to religion, there's also going to be your own truth where you're going to live a life of love and happiness, right? Where let's just stop being bad people towards each other. I honestly feel like it's an easy concept of, you know what, just don't be a bad person. What is so difficult? Why do you need a so-called book written by a messiah to tell you to be a good person when it's just a simple concept of being a good person?
All right. Yeah. I love that you touched the messiah, but you don't want to get into it. So, so my question is, do you think there was a way that our elders, looking at the history that you've studied, that they used to connect, be it with nature, with the creator, with Utiko, Umdali, Nkulunkulu, Mwari, depending on where you come from, So was there a way of connecting before we introduced to all these religions that seem to be dividing not only Africa but the world?
Yeah, there's definitely, you see, the great thing about African spirituality is that there's so much, it's such a big concept that you can't, because African spirituality just talks about all the different forms of belief that Africans have, right?
Yes.
So you can have the different aspects of believing, being a Sangoma, being an Inyanga, all these are different concepts, but that fall under African spirituality, right? So for me, the way I look at it is, there's definitely information that our ancestors had that we probably don't understand anymore in how to connect with nature, right? Because one thing that we all know is that there's more to us than just a physical form, right? There's more to us than just a physical form. There's spirit and there's more higher levels of understanding, right?
Yes.
And I feel like an advantage our ancestors had is that they believed in what they wanted to believe, right? In terms of everything was their choice and everything was their understanding. Their way of life was done in their own perspective, right? And so if it was done in the African perspective, it must have held a lot of truth for them, right? So that's where the concept comes in for me as well, right? When it comes to that. So even when it comes to now the different forms of spirituality, as to which one is greater, which one is more powerful, we honestly do not know, right? It's one of those things of, it's just believe what you want to believe at this point.
Going forward, bro, I need to find out, because as Africa, I believe we're the most creative continent. We have created so many things that we know and things that we don't know. As kids, I remember we would turn bricks into cars. We had no toys, we had no PS5, we didn't know all these things. But whatever it is that was given to us, we were able to make something out of it. I remember girls were making dolls out of what do they call it? Out of maize. Maize, they would do all sorts of stuff with that. Even I see even today, kids still have a way of expressing themselves. Even our art is one of the most richest variety of art we have in the world. How can we use that to teach who we are, to try and live our fullest vision of being an African child using the creative art forms that we have?
So for me, the way I think about it is that it all comes out to freedom of expression, right? So that's the important part about art when it comes to, especially to an African context, is that allowing ourselves to express ourselves in our fullest forms is how we can use our art to educate and learn and learn for future generations, right? Because when it comes to art and the creativity that comes along it, right? Whether you look at the fashion in today's world, whether it comes to music, everything is becoming more and more black excellence, right? Because, like, for example, piano is taking over the world right now. This is African music, and before that, it was hip hop, which was Black American music. So you see that, artistically speaking, black people have always had a foot ahead than everyone else when it comes to the creation of art, right? So I feel like that's one thing we should definitely continue exploiting, right? So, and this is why I love everything when it comes to the new artistic expressions, whether it's the fashion industry that people like Mo Farrell are taking over, and Richard Nisi and them, or it's the music where you have people like Uncle Waffles taking over the world when it comes to music. So yeah, for me, I love all of it.
Now, as Africa, we have our Afrobeats, Amapiano, we have film harps from Ghana, Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, and so on. And we have all these different art forms. For example, I know that should be, is it Grammy or BT? No, should be Grammys. They added Chimrenga is a category in their Grammys, which is a Zimbabwean sound, and so on and so forth.
Oh, that's dope.
Yeah. So what do we do, like, to try and unite, because we are so polarized and so divided as a people? As much as we have all this, what seems like it's our strength, is something that can pull us together, can take us forward. What do we do as Africans? Because we are divided as tribes, we are divided as nations, we are divided on political grounds, we are divided on status. You use an iPhone, I use a Samsung, and whatnot. So we have all these things, gadgets or material things or philosophies that we're fighting over. What can be that one thing that is unifying, that makes us to come to a place where we say, you are my brother, I'm your brother, let's pull in this direction?
I think the one thing that can bring us all together is understanding that we are one, really. We are one people when it comes to us as Africans. Considering that we share not... Okay, fine. You get to understand that Africans are the most diverse people on the planet, right?
Yeah.
In terms of, that's why we have so many different languages, more than 2,000 languages on the continent.
Yeah.
And you have so many different countries and tribes and everything like that.
Yeah.
But at the end of it, we're all black. Like, we all have that connects us, which is our Africanity, right? So if for us, I feel like even embracing the differences that we have, it should be part of it, right? Because the reason I love being Swati is because of who I am, right? Yeah. I'm a Swati, and then I get to meet people of other tribes, and I love them for who they are as well, right?
Yeah.
As long as everything goes right between the cultures, there's nothing but love to be shared, brother.
Yeah.
That's the way I see it.
So now, coming towards the end, I would love to know, I'm an African child, I live in a country where there are all these pressures around me. How do I stand above all the noise? Because there's one thing that has happened over the years, is inferiority complex. An African person has been put in a place where he doesn't value himself. Someone will even see this interview and say, these guys, why did they go to the falls? Couldn't they be in some hotel, a 5-star hotel and whatnot, But we chose to come here because we're in Africa. This is who we are. This is that hotel. It destroyed some nature. It destroyed some elements that we are celebrating today, being here. So how do I embrace who I am and hold on to it despite all the noise around me?
It's ignoring it. It's getting to understand that the rest of the world has never liked Africa in the first place. So why would we be surprised if they still don't, So that's why even for everything to have happened, for colonization and slavery and everything, they just didn't like us. They don't plan on liking us anytime soon. But hey, man, as long as we keep doing our thing and being great, we can never be ignored forever. Because that's the way I see it. Africans are just naturally great, and we're gonna keep being great no matter what obstacles you throw in our way, right? Yeah. We've survived so much, and we'll continue thriving. Yes.
What do we do as Africa to get back to where we're coming from? We've been pulled by different forces, different things in different directions. How do we go back to rediscover our identity, rediscover our roots, be connected to our roots, and stand and be African and be proud? What is it that we can start doing now to fix what has gone wrong, to fix what has been stolen, to fix what has been replaced by something else. How do we do that as a people? Or what can an individual do to go back to that place?
It's to learn. I feel like education is the answer to all these questions that you're asking about, right? For me, as the way I see it, the more Africans get to learn about themselves and about the world that we live in, the better off we're going to be, right? So even the way because one thing that we can't hold ourselves to a bad regard in is the fact that the bad things have happened, right? In terms of colonization and all these things that happen to deter us away from who we are, right? The only thing we can do right now is just learn about ourselves and get back to whatever we can, right? In terms of who we are, which identities we want to use. Because like as King Sopuza II, the previous king of Eswatini, would say, when it comes to he was having an interview and they asked him what does he think is the best way forward for Africans right now, right? He was asked this in like the 80s or 70s, and his response was, is that one thing that Africans have to do is that we're gonna keep everything that we do need, right, from the rest of the world, what we learn, and we're not gonna keep the things that we don't need, like. So that's where the learning comes in. Where we need to learn about how do we want to live our lives and how do we want to identify being African, right? And live it to our truth.
I need you to dwell on one hero that the world has kind of ignored, or that the world don't seem to know much. So I want you to talk about the Queen who started Queen Labotsibeni, who started the first magazine, I think, in Southern Africa, if not in Africa, and many other exploits that he did. And then maybe if you can briefly tell us about that, because these are African heroes that we don't get to learn about. We will be learning about the Hitlers, the Mao Zedong and whatnot, and then we don't know much about ourselves. We seem, I have been around the world and people don't know jack about Africa, but we are the ones who can even correct them about their own history, but we also don't know our own history.
Okay, so for me, when it comes to Queen Labotsibeni being one of the greatest figures to ever rule in this earth, is because of the great importance she put into education, right? That she understood that, okay, you know what, colonization, because she was ruling at a time when the scramble for Africa was beginning. She got into power in 1874 all the way until 1925. She was ruling in Swaziland, right? So this was the most horrible time for her, because this was when the scramble for Africa was happening, colonization was happening in Africa, right? And so for her, instead of going into battle against white people and using wars to try win against them, she preferred education, right? So that's where she ended up being one of the first people to have a black-owned newspaper, one of the first people to have a black-owned newspaper circulating in Southern Africa, right? At her time, she was also one of the richest women of her generation. So you find with Queen Labotsibeni, she's one of the people who also started the South African Natives Congress at the time. What ANC is today is part of what Labotsibeni started amongst other people in Southern Africa at that time, to fighting for liberty. Because around 1912, that's when the Land Separation Act started. That's when black people were getting displaced from their lands. And also that's when Queen Labotsibeni's fight was also really happening. That's when she started the newspaper and everything, even the ANC, or what the ANC is today. So that's why she's, for me, one of the greatest figures that we should learn more about.
I hope that we get to illuminate more on Queen Labotsibeni. If an African get to learn more, Google about her, and let's give the shout outs that she deserves, give her the props that she deserves, because she is a very important figure. We usually focus on kings and a little bit on queens, or nothing on queens, you know. So unless we're talking about queens from elsewhere, which I want to talk about. So so now for people who want to get in touch with you, where do they connect with your content? If you didn't know, this is KRAYZIE Historian. He's a TikTok sensation.
Yeah.
So you will have to to connect and see what he does on TikTok and the stuff that he talks about. Yeah, one thing for sure, if you stand for the truth, you will not say things and people clap hands for you. So he's that one guy who says things and people start fighting in the comments and elsewhere, even start making videos of insulting him. So maybe if you can tell people where you can be found, how can people find you on TikTok or Facebook or any other place where you're found?
Yeah, so like he said, my name is KRAYZIE Historian. That's KRAYZIE, KRAYZIE Historian from Eswatini. Definitely find me on TikTok. That's where I'm based. Yeah, hope you guys enjoy the content.
Itu